Joining us now, senior White House counselor, former campaign manager, Trump for president, my former boss when I was chairman of Virginia, and one of the best, most effective people I've ever had the opportunity to work with. And also, my son, Joseph, loves her to death. So that's all you need. Joining us now, KellyAnne Conway from the White House. KellyAnne, thanks for being with us.
Good morning, John. Wonderful to be with you and your listeners.
KellyAnne, let's get right to the impeachment vote today by Pelosi. Do you expect a 100% partisan vote?
No, not at all. In fact, you've got Democrats who are yet to commit to an impeachment inquiry or an impeachment resolution vote. And you should honestly read the list to your listeners, because they will quickly realize in these congressional districts where these marginal members won districts that Trump and Pence won in 2016 and they won in 2018, they're saying, well, hold on. I promised I'd come here and get the USMCA passed, get a better trade deal with China, keep manufacturing and construction and the overall economy humming along at near historic levels. I promised that I would do something about drug pricing and infrastructure. And I'm supporting a president who's trying to, denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, hold fast against places like China and Iran, get that border secured. I mean, they promise to do this to their constituents, and they're getting an earful when they're back home, John. This is what happens in the Democratic Party when your leaders represent California and New York, and in the case of Steny Hoyer, Maryland. But I wish I could tell you more about the impeachment resolution vote, but I don't know what the heck it is, because I'm just reading quotes from Nancy Pelosi overnight. She told The Atlantic, well, we don't need to have the vote tomorrow. Steny Hoyer earlier in the week seemed confused, per usual, but he seemed particularly confused. He said, I don't know what an impeachment resolution is. Well, how the heck can the rest of us know what an impeachment resolution is meant to convey if the number 2 in the House has no idea? But they're allowing the process to be led around by Schiff and Pelosi, and people see it for what it is, which is an illegitimate, ill-conceived impeachment inquiry into a democratically elected president. They've been trying to get rid of this man since the moment he was elected, since they were crying about it openly. And they're also, don't be fooled, everybody, they're also trying to rob you of your vote next year. They want to rob you of your vote next year. And I think people should stand up and say, he's my president and he's our president, and it is an extraordinary event in the United States of America to impeach a president, and we're nowhere near being justified to do that.
KellyAnne, when you look at the text for the resolution, it was supposed to be transparency, due process. Look, I know it's not really clear what it is, but I don't see any of that in there. I mean, Adam Schiff has got all the power. He can basically determine whether or not you can ask questions, who can get subpoenaed, what information goes to judiciary. So this seems to me on the surface to be the scam on top of the sham.
Well, it is. And the one time that we would have benefited from actually having cameras near Adam Schiff, there are no cameras near Adam Schiff. We've had to suffer for years of watching him constantly in front of the cameras lying about collusion in plain sight and impeaching and getting rid of a president and Russia. And now he's just working in the dark, in secret. And when you say due process, Americans understand what you mean, John. You mean that just like for them, if they were in a court of law for everything from a civil or a criminal action to a parking ticket, they would have the opportunity to confront and challenge witnesses and evidence and present their own witnesses and evidence. This country is based on the rule of law, and that has been completely subverted and perverted on the altar of getting rid of Donald Trump as fast as we can. This impeachment inquiry is much like Mueller, much like Kavanaugh, much like everything. It's in a conclusion in search of evidence. In other words, get the person and attach a super long superhero's cape to whoever is trying to challenge the president or someone around him, and imbue them with instant credibility, be presumptively negative about everything the president has said and done. But the people see it for what it is. They see that you've got a bunch of politicians yet again either ignoring the will of the people or worse, subverting the will of the people from 2016. And in the case of 2020, we're just a year away from that now, John, trying to pregame that, trying to deny people ahead of time, preemptively, their right to go to the ballot box. Look, if the Democrats knew how to beat Donald Trump fairly and squarely at the ballot box, they would focus on that one candidate. They'd clear the field. They'd put all the money. They'd have a huge super PAC. They would have every piece of legislation on Capitol Hill would be to help that person beat Donald Trump. They haven't a clue how to beat this guy. They haven't a clue. And all the armchair psychologists out there constantly wanted to analyze the President of the United States. Let's have a go at people like Steny Hoyer, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden. These people open their mouths and they make absolutely no sense.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America, live, Washington, D.C., your nation's capital. We're with KellyAnne Conway, senior counselor to the President of the United States, former campaign manager, Trump 2016. KellyAnne, so we're going to have this vote today, but it's not clear what happens after it. Let's say it passes. I mean, what exactly changes?
Very little. So I think the Democrats will say, see, the Republicans wanted process, we gave them process. But that doesn't affect the substance, which is that the president said this, that, and the other. And then they invent things that the president did not say on the call with the Ukrainian president. The Democrats never thought that the president and the White House would release the transcript. And much like the president's social media feed, the transcript is available to everyone. Everyone in this country, indeed this world, can read it for themselves. And I would like them to take a highlighter and show me exactly where they hear the president referring to Joe Biden as a scary, spooky 2020 opponent, where he says go dig up dirt on him, where he says go and investigate, where there's quid pro quos, let alone 8 of them that we were promised before the transcript of the call was released. Where does he talk about holding up aid? Where does he even say the words 2020? And so I think intent matters, number one, even if not, especially if you're Donald Trump, the president. Number two, the president said, hey, people are talking about Biden, his son. You're darn right they were. The Hill newspaper had an article in April, the New York Times on May 1st, John King of CNN talked about it on his show on May 12th, and then CNN tweeted out what he talked about in his show. You had the ABC News with a four-line screaming headline about whether Hunter Biden's dealings in Ukraine and elsewhere could hurt his father's presidential chances. These reporters would never write those stories now, John, but they sure were then. Adam Entus of the New Yorker had a front-page double-issue cover story, and it basically asked in open daylight, hey, could Hunter Biden's, quote, tumultuous personal life and, quote, dubious business dealings derail his father's presidential chances? So everybody else was allowed to talk about it. The President of the United States is not. And you don't get insulated from scrutiny because you're running for president. In fact, it should be higher and deeper. And so I think there are legitimate questions about Joe Biden saying in front of the Council of Foreign Relations on camera in January of 2018, oh, yeah, and I told them I'm on the ground for 90 more minutes, or we're going to hold this up. You don't believe me? Call Barack. Call the president. Mr. Tough Guy, wasn't he? Holding up aid to people in need. And the Ukrainian president says he felt no pressure. They got the aid. They're using the aid. All of these facts matter. None of these facts are among the ones being leaked out and lied about from interested people, meaning people who have a bias and want to get this president out of here and have tried from the moment he was elected.
So, KellyAnne, also one thing that's getting no play, when Mick Mulvaney was in charge of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, I mean, the Trump administration, and you know this, you're there. I mean, they were undergoing a review of all this foreign aid to be sure it was going to the right places, and it was all being stalled to be sure it was checked accurately. And that story, I think I saw it in one network. It is announced. So kind of the holdup has been across the board, where the Trump administration wanted to be sure the foreign aid that was going to all of these countries was going to the right places, and there was some accountability and scrutiny with it, right?
No doubt. And that is a commitment the president made to the American people. It's part of how he won, because no one else in the Republican field, and certainly the woman who lost to him, who people never thought would lost, who still is an ungraceful loser, whose name I won't say lest I be accused of still talking about her, she could never have said with any type of credibility, hey, we're going to review the foreign aid. We're going to review what we're doing and how it's being used. And in this case, in the case of Ukraine, you had the Ukrainian president very proudly saying on that call, hey, I got my cues from you, drain the swamp. I ran successfully on anti-corruption, and it's legitimate to want to see if they're going to make good on that promise, because so many governments and indeed regimes who promise to do that don't. and we just keep shoveling over the money over a series of years anyway. And so you have Donald J. Trump, who comes here with zero political experience, and it comes as a non-politician businessman saying, well, let's see. What are you going to do with the money? Let's just find out if you're going to make good on your stated promise to clean up corruption in your own country. But the aid was not denied. In fact, the aid is being used as we speak.
Right.
And none of these facts seem to matter to the Democrats, who were embarrassed, flat-footed and then flat-faced, embarrassed by the Mueller report and then by the sequel to the Mueller report, the Mueller testimony about the Mueller report, which was a complete disaster for them. So they've been hunting and pecking ever since, and here's where we are. But America will see what this is. If they're voting on an impeachment resolution today, they are not voting on drug pricing, infrastructure, another tax cut, more deregulation, more constitutionalist, originalist judges, a way to keep this economy humming. They're not voting on sanctions for countries and leaders who should further be sanctioned, and they're certainly not voting on the USMCA. Mm-hmm. The trade agreement, the updated, modernized trade agreement that would help our farmers, our manufacturers, our construction workers, help this country. Canada's on board, Mexico's on board, we're on board. The only people not on board are the obsessive Keystone cops that call themselves the Democratic leadership in the House.
KellyAnne, Conway, we're almost out of time. Just two more quick questions, because you're right about that. Also, they're not dealing with stopping surprise medical billing, which is hammering people all over the United States. There's opportunities there. They're not doing any of it. Two more things, though. Recent polls come out, and Rasmussen Fox, 50% of Americans, voters, want the president removed from office and impeached. So that leads me to this question. Are we losing the messaging war? Are they out messaging us?
Well, they're out lying everybody, and they're sneaky. There's no question. I think every time Adam Schiff has somebody swear under oath, he ought to raise his right hand and say the same thing. And so I think this is war, and it's been war from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And you've got to suit up and equip yourselves for battles like that. We've seen this. We saw it over tax returns. We saw it over Gorsuch and especially Kavanaugh and Kavanaugh Part 2. We saw it over Mueller for 2+ years. And I think the president continues to wear him down and wear him out. And that includes a lot of the never Trump Republicans who are elected officials or cable news cranks or Twitter trolls, whatever they're doing out there. He wears them down and wears them out. And they can scream all they want, but they're not going to subvert a democratically elected president. We're not going to allow them to subvert or skip the process either toward an impeachment. So it's good to have all hands on deck, and it's very important to show Americans that this is a sham process. Our White House counsel wrote the letter, presented it to Congress on October 8th. That's over 3 weeks ago, John, saying this is illegitimate and unconstitutional, and we're not complying. That's a badass move legally. Politically, the House thinks impeachment is whatever they say it is. But they have to answer to their constituents who think that they should also be focused on other things. By the way, you're quoting national polls, and those same national polls always showed Hillary ahead.
That's true.
You look at the 17 target states, and I've seen polling in those states, you look at the 17 swing states that are arguably in play, the expanded map, if you will, for 2020, there is very little, if any, appetite, including among independents and swing voters, for impeaching a president of the United States, even one whose tone they may not sometimes like or tweets they may not sometimes like. They sure the heck like opening up their paychecks, their 401ks. They sure the heck like having a president of the United States who is transparent and tells them exactly what he thinks on any number of issues, out on the lawn, through his social media feed, in the press avails, in the pool sprays. He's the most available president, I think, in definitely in modern history, if not all of history. He's the most available, accessible president, and he speaks directly to the people, cuts out the middleman, and it's the middleman who doesn't like that.
KellyAnne, Conway, final question. A lot of our listeners have been calling in the last 2 weeks and saying, how on earth did all these never-Trumpers get key positions, key political positions in the White House, on the NSC, in various ambassadorships, charge day affairs, when they don't want to carry out the president's America First foreign policy agenda? Like, how did this happen?
It's a great question, one I've discussed with the president directly, but I've been discussing it for a very long time. Look, some people are holdovers because they're, quote, seen as subject matter experts, but I think your question you should ask Steve Bannon, because he had a seat on the NSC. He was very involved in transition. Not everybody was. He and two others particularly took over the transition. I think it's an important question to ask. I know he'll be there. I guess you're in his basement doing your broadcast.
Yes, I'm in his basement.
And so he probably is in the best position to answer that. Probably did what he could do on a limited scale to root out folks who are, putting their own personal agendas above the president's agenda, which was very clearly the mandate that won in the election, which was America first, not America alone, but America first. And implicit in that is that you're going to hire people, not that they're loyal to Donald Trump, but they're loyal to the Constitution.
Right.
They're taking an oath to the Constitution. They're loyal to the country. They're loyal to a vision where we stop putting every other country ahead of us and that we just trust people who worked in previous administrations to all of a sudden on a dime say, oh, you know what, I thought Hillary would win, but I'm okay with Donald Trump too. That's just never going to be true. Mm-hmm. But I'd be curious to hear his answer too, because he had a big hand in a lot of the transition and the personnel decisions.
Well, he's coming up. He'll be here in a moment.
And a seat on the NSC until they they took him out of that. But he had a seat on the NSC as well.
I will definitely ask him that, because that's where we are. War Room impeachment coming up at 9:05, as everyone knows, here across the John Fredericks Radio Network. And we did build a studio in Steve's basement, the bunker here, as we follow impeachment. Here's my final thing, because you've been so gracious with your time. You mentioned that great document letter from counsel to Pelosi 3 weeks ago. I mean, I thought it was a dynamite letter when I saw it, but nobody's complying with it. I mean, they're still going in and doing the depositions, even though your lawyer said we're not going to participate. Reconcile that for us.
Sure. Well, some people are not participating. We've invoked executive privilege, and some people are not participating. Dr. Charlie Kupperman did not go the other day. There is a report that Ambassador Bolton will not will not show up voluntarily. They've invited him, quote, invited him to testify on November 7th. So we'll see where all that goes. But we put out the standard. We put out our position. Others, of course, will go and testify if they feel like they need to. But even there, we don't know what their full testimony is. We only know what the selective leaks of their testimony are.
Right.
So we don't know the full picture. And I think if there is ever a time when we should have the cameras rolling and be able to challenge witnesses, we've seen it in other oversight hearings. We've seen it with the Judiciary Committee hearings. We've seen it with Intel Committee hearings. When Adam Schiff had his very first opportunity, John, the very first opening minutes of his opportunity as the chairman of the Intel Committee, which Pelosi decided would oversee this sham investigation rather than judiciary where it belongs, or oversight where it could be, what were his opening remarks? He lied. He read a parody of a phone call that never happened to the American people, hoping. It can't be because he thought it was funny, because he's anything but funny. He's the most unfunny person in Washington, which is saying something, Adam Schiff. He lied, hoping that people would sort of tune in and tune out to what he was saying, and to this moment have nested somewhere in their brains that the president said, hey, I'm just going to say this for the seventh time, you must do this. The president of the United States never said that. That call simply didn't exist. This person should be impeached from being ahead of the investigation. Put Jim Himes, the number 2, in front of it, in charge of it. So there is so much here that we're going to have a chance to respond to. But SIP alone did a smart thing, because you either say from the beginning it's unconstitutional or illegitimate, or you open up the floodgates and you start giving them everything, even though you don't even know what they're investigating. It's a conclusion in search of evidence. I had a reporter ask me this morning out in the Northville on the driveway after a Fox News hit, well, I mean, wouldn't you agree that even if, quote, the Congress doesn't show a quid pro quo, they can still impeach the president? I mean, think about that question, and think about the implications of that question coming from a reporter. It's supposed to be a reporter, not an activist or an advocate. More on that in the next time I talk to you. But think about that. Hey, we can't find the 8 quid pro quos we said were in the call, so we're just going to go for abuse of power now. Or we don't like the way Donald Trump ties his shoes, or that he beat precious Hillary Clinton. I would give these people more credit if they said, I don't like the way he ties his shoes or combs his hair. I don't like the way he eats his steak. At least say, this is the reason I'm going to impeach the president. Let everybody see that you have no legitimate basis right now to do so. and they should be honest about that, but they're not. So we will have a chance to challenge witnesses, challenge evidence, present witnesses. Again, John, the way you and your listeners would if you were in any type of legal action.
KellyAnne Conway, Senior White House Counselor, President Trump Campaign Manager, Trump 2016. My boss when I was there. KellyAnne, thanks for being with us. Thank you so much.
God bless you. My best to your son.
Thank you,
Happy
KellyAnne.
Halloween.
Thank
Don't
you.
let the spooky people on Capitol Hill get the best of you.
What about
more treats, fewer tricks?
What about the spooky people here in Bannon's basement? Thank you, KellyAnne. Thanks for being with us. John Fredericks Radio Network. Steve Bannon. War Room Impeachment coming up. I think it's episode 12. Raheem Kasham just got in. I have to deal with Jason Miller and his Washington jersey to further annoy me today. And, of course, Dan the Man is here. He basically is in charge of the operation. We're just figureheads. Coming up, War Room Impeachment, episode 12. Joe Morrissey after that, Fight and Joe. Keep it right here. John Fredericks Radio Network, your Godzilla of the Truth in America.